This morning's gospel reading is from the book of Luke, chapter 12, verses 13 through 21. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God."
This is a question I've often asked myself. What practical difference does it make to be a Christian today? I mean, it might make a difference personally in your heart, but maybe that's a question that we shall be able to answer for anyone who asks it. Because I think there's a real suspicion that following Jesus is just an activity that some people like pursuing. That it might not make any practical difference at all. I mean, some like cooking, some like playing cards, some like travel, and some like religion. And we tend to treat it that way, don't we? Church is one of many activities that we can engage in. Go if we have time. So what difference does it make? Is it more than just an activity? How does it influence our lives and our hearts and our actions? And that's at the heart of the message that we get from our passage in Colossians chapter 3. Paul is telling us that if we confess with our mouths and we believe in our hearts that Jesus is Lord, that we are now people that are new, have been made new. And that makes every practical difference. The old way of doing things doesn't apply. Following Jesus rearranges our values. It leads me to question, why aren't Christians speaking and acting out more as the antidote to our woes? Why do so many Christian leaders and spokespeople seem to be as adversarial as everyone else? Seem to be part of the problem instead of part of the solution? Why does everybody today seem like a chaos agent, you know? I mean, just think about this. I used to get Decision Magazine all the time. Maybe you get Decision Magazine, but why has Decision Magazine turned into like a political rag all of a sudden? This was once a magazine that put evangelism and missions on its front cover at every issue. And now we're more likely to see something about partisan politics. At the same time, if you look at the folks on the left side, they've undone themselves by having this singular fascination with our president. Why? It only gives him more ammunition on Twitter. And it seems to me that none of this, on either the right or the left or anywhere else in the church, is making any difference at all. And now we have to deal with these two shootings in Dayton and in El Paso. One of these looks like it was motivated by hate, according to the governor of Texas. It's got to stop, right? I mean, you just look at the news and you go, when is this going to stop? And anyone who's ever been an observer of things, and maybe has wondered if they should go to church to see if it's any good, might wonder what kinds of values that they'll actually see demonstrated by the people inside. Will this do me any good? Will this be any different than anything else I'm getting? What difference does it make? So we ought to strive for something different from what our society offers. We ought to strive to do something different. Otherwise, we should just go out and join whatever community group we want to, join, and then leave it at that. Because if we've got nothing else to offer, let's at least leave Jesus out so that we can avoid confusion. Paul tells us this. Since then you have been raised with Christ. Set your hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Paul tells us in very clear terms that our values and our lives should be different, that they should change, that they should at least be in the process of changing. Change doesn't happen in an instant, it happens over a lifetime, right? We hope that we will achieve, becoming the image of Christ through our lives. How will we know when we get there? Well, Paul says we'll know when we get there when we're united in Christ. When what separates us and divides us is overcome in the light of Christ. And so quite simply put, given the events of this past weekend, white supremacy has no place in the church. And even speaking that way, or in ways that hint at that, have no place in our church. It doesn't cut it. That's not a message that we are hearing enough from Christian leaders, including myself. And I think most of us probably assumed that it was a given. But I just want to say it to be sure. Because in the light of Christ, white supremacy and hatred has no place in the church. And the church offers no sanctuary for those kinds of ideas. Paul says in the last verse of our passage, this is important and key. Here there is no Gentile or Jew. Here there is no circumcised or uncircumcised. Here there are no barbarians, Scythians, slaves, or free. But Christ is all and is in all. There's the key. Christ is all and is in all. All of our differences are overcome in the light of Christ. Paul is calling us not just to say it, but to live that way. We are different as Christians because we stand together, not apart from each other. It doesn't mean we're all going to agree on everything. It doesn't all mean we're going to look alike. But we understand that Christ is working in each of us, and in turn calls us to work for the good of the gospel, and in turn for the good of all people. It's like John Wesley's formula for being an effective Christian. 3 simple rules. Do no harm, do good, and learn to tell the difference by going closer to Christ through practicing the faith. That's all well and good, you might say, but that still sounds more theoretical than practical. So where is the practical? Well, generosity is really a great place to start. And Jesus tells us about that in our gospel passage from Luke 12. So let's switch gears by turning over there in our Bibles. It begins by someone coming to Jesus with a very practical problem. It says in verse 13, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Hey, Jesus, I know the right thing to do. Please inform my brother that I am right and that he is wrong. Do you hear that in there? Maybe if you didn't, you hear it now. It doesn't sound so much like the two sides of our nation right now. God, please tell the other side that they are wrong and we are right. Everyone wants God on their side when it comes right down to everything, right? Jesus, I know that you're on my side. Thank you so much. But Jesus isn't having this kind of conversation, is he? He says in verses 14 and 15, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." So basically, what does he say to this man? I'm not going to do what you're asking me to do. In fact, I'm going to turn your little dispute into an object lesson for those who are listening to me. He says, you know what the real problem is here? It's not the fact that you and your brother and those like you can't come to an amicable settlement over your father's estate. The real problem is that you've made that single thing your overriding concern. Maybe this is something that's happened within your own family. Maybe you've seen it happen in other families, where families come apart over the division of an estate. Even if it's really not much money, or maybe it's something simple like a piece of furniture. I've seen it all. And maybe the relationships were fragile or weren't good to begin with. But now throw money or possessions into the mix and it's like throwing gasoline on a fire, isn't it? Things explode into anger, into rage, accusations, and finally, the end of the relationship, estrangement. Jesus says the problem is not the money. Money's just an object, it's just a tool. The problem is that concern for the money is the only thing that matters. One of the most consistent things that Jesus preaches is that people are always more important than things. Always. Always more important than things. If it comes down to relationships or money with Jesus or anything else, relationships are going to win 100 times out of 100. There's no exceptions. Money comes and goes. But family is permanent. And by extension, Jesus wants us to understand that our church family is permanent. The relationships that we have with each other are important. More important than things. And so if you're going to err on the side of things or people, err on the side of people in your relationships, lest you become embittered and isolated, finally alone. Greed destroys, but having a generous heart heals. Jesus explains the problem with a parable. He says in verses 16 to 21, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. Right? But God said to him, you fool. This very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with those who store up things for themselves, but are not rich toward God. You see the problem in the parable? It might seem a little obscure at first. What's Jesus trying to get at here? But Jesus says the rich man died with nothing of real eternal value. And he died before he was ready. He had lived wisely, and now there's no time to make it up. The only way to really successfully live richly and wisely is to be rich toward God. Jesus is talking about living generously. And I love generosity. I like talking about generosity because really it appeals to our better selves. I don't know about you, but I like being generous. Don't you? Don't you like to be generous? Have the opportunity to be generous? I mean, I know in my heart when I can't be and when I can be. Generosity allows me to trust my heart and to hear God's voice speaking to me to do the right thing. And generosity feels good. When we're generous, our brains actually produce chemicals that give us a positive high. Our brains actually reward us for being generous. It's a nice feeling. You know, generosity is not about guilt or coercion or duty. You can't guilt someone into being generous. You can guilt someone into giving you money, but you can't guilt them into feeling generous. Generosity is not like paying taxes or paying a speeding ticket or getting hit up for a donation. You know, when you're trying to get out the door and the bell ringer's out there and you go, okay, you have my change. It's not really generosity, is it? That's like saying, I hear the bell, leave me alone. Those kinds of things feel bad. They feel annoying. Sometimes they even feel a little icky. But generosity isn't like that at all. You know the difference of what I'm talking about. And that's one of the reasons that we've really switched the way we talk about giving in our church, from more of a duty to generosity. Because we know that our church is a good place. It does good work in our community. We enjoy being a part of our church. We want to keep it going so that we continue to grow. We can continue to be all that we are to more and more people. It's a far different thing than saying, well, put $1 in the plate so that we can keep the doors open and the lights on. Right? Because really it's not about that, is it? See, generosity actually plays down money. And plays down possessions. And it plays up relationships. Because that's really what the important thing is. More than one person has said to me that they enjoy giving because they see the difference that it makes in people's lives. Sure, they can watch their money work in a bank statement or a stock portfolio, but they can see it work with their eyes when they see it work in the church. And here's the bigger picture. Generosity is much bigger than money or possessions. Because even if you're unable to practice generosity with your things, you can still have a generous heart towards people. Generosity dovetails into several other Christian practices and values. Things like hospitality. And it's an expression of the values found in the fruits of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, and especially kindness, goodness, not to mention faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. It's good to be generous and to practice generosity with everyone and every turn that we can. And not only is it good, but it begins to change our relationships with our communities, and it changes our relationships with our things. It's a very practical way to live out the new life in Christ that Paul is talking about in Colossians. And it certainly looks very different from the social and political environment that we live in today. Because it's impossible to be generous toward your neighbor and also be filled with the desire to shoot him. It sounds trite, but it's not. Yeah, you got, yeah. I know, it sounds trite. It sounds trite, but it's not. If we have generous hearts, it changes us. When we're generous to each other, to our neighbors, to our world, it breaks down barriers. It changes how we think of each other. Generosity has no strings attached, but it allows God to work in us, and it allows people to flourish around us. Generosity heals. Greed hurts. Practice a generosity that heals because it makes a practical difference. It's not just a concept. It's something that you can do today, tomorrow, and for the rest of your life. Next time somebody asks you what difference being a Christian makes, humbly point them to the idea and the practice of generosity more than anything else. You know, it's really interesting to me. You know who the number one group of people that give toward charitable causes other than the church? Christians. Not only do they give more toward their churches, but they also give more toward every other charitable cause that's out there. More than secular people do. Christians know how to give because they want to be generous. They're motivated by the love of Christ. So as you think about all the ways that you can practice generosity in your own life today and tomorrow and set up that practice the rest of your life, I'd like us to turn our attention toward the sacrament of communion this morning. As we prepare for the sacrament, Christ offers us a generous meal at the communion table with no strings attached. Just an invitation to come and to receive forgiveness, to receive renewal and regeneration. And in the light of our scriptures this morning, I invite you to enjoy Christ's generous offer at the table, open to all who simply come forward. In the United Methodist Church, we celebrate an open table. That's what I love about being United Methodist, right? Everybody's welcome. Everybody's welcome not just to be here, but to participate. Anyone can take communion. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you've ever had communion before, whether you've ever had communion at all. Come as you are to the table. And if you're unable